everyone, welcome back to the Internet Report, where we uncover what's working and what's breaking on the internet, and why. I'm Barry Collins, and I'll be hosting today with the amazing Mike Hicks, Principal Solutions Analyst at Cisco ThousandEyes. This week we're taking a break from our usual programming for a special conversation with Lefteris Menasakis, exploring all things BGP, including BGP Zombies, an interesting case of suspicious prefix announcements, and BGP monitoring best practices. A seasoned researcher and network engineer, Lefteris co-founded CoBGP, which is now part of Cisco ThousandEyes. He currently serves as a software engineering technical leader at ThousandEyes, focusing on BGP monitoring. As always, we've included chapters in the episode description below, so you can skip ahead to the sections that are most interesting to you. And if you haven't already, we'd love you to take a moment to give us a follow over at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to listen. So let's start with the basics. What is BGP and what is it used for?
One of my favorite expressions about BGP is that BGP is the glue that holds the internet together. And it sounds quite graphical, but it's also true because it's the protocol that determines the path that packets need to follow in order to reach a destination. So, for example, if right now we're talking over the internet, I am in Greece, you are in the UK, if I remember, and Mike is in Australia. This communication takes place over autonomous systems, which are networks that essentially have their own capability to configure policy. So each company, each organization have one or multiple autonomous systems, and they can use BGP in order to configure policy and traffic, how traffic flows across the network and across the internet. BGP is the protocol that determines which AES's traffic passes through in order to reach their destination. And it's one of the core protocols of the internet.
And it's quite an old protocol, built on trust?
Correct. So Geoff Houston says something that I really like, that when BGP was first invented in 1989, and when it first started being used by research institutes and by universities, we didn't expect it would escape the lab. This is his expression, and I really like to say that. Back then, due to the fact that the network was comprised only from the universities and government institutes and research institutes, all these networks trusted each other. So there was no inherent need for building trust to the protocol. Therefore, BGP has had many iterations since 1989. The one that we use now is BGP version 4 from RFC 4271 of 2006. But still, there is no authentication and authorization on BGP. Anybody can announce anything they would like, essentially the prefixes they would want, even if they don't own these prefixes, even if they are not assigned these prefixes. And this can cause a lot of problems.
So, Mike, what do you think some of those problems are?
So, because we've built on this inherent level of trust there, we could be masquerading as someone else to start with, or we're advertising we know the best way to get to this particular path. Just there's something actually that Lefteris said to me previously, which I think sort of goes fundamentally in this, is that we often refer to BGP as a routing protocol, but it isn't a routing protocol itself. It is actually a client-server architectural protocol. So it's actually saying how we get between these two areas. So if I actually say, I know how to get to the UK from here, I could effectively route all traffic through me, and therefore then I've got effectively access to that traffic. And because we're working on this level of trust, we have this implication that, okay, this is a legitimate way. You've told me this is the best way to get there, so that's how I'm going to get there. So obviously we have this problem of not just performance degradation, but then also having our traffic effectively flow through somewhere we particularly don't want it to go.
If it's that easy to hijack routes or send traffic the wrong way, what does that mean for internet users?
First of all, it's not that easy anymore. There has been since 2006 and the last years in particular, like since the advent of RPKI and other security mechanisms like BGPsec, that of course has not been implemented yet, and ASPA, which is a new protocol that protects BGP as well. All these advancements have, in combination with BGP filters that networks apply in order to not allow anybody announce anything. For example, if I am a provider, an ISP, I know that you own these specific prefixes and this is your AES. So I create a filter in our BGP session and I allow you to announce only these prefixes. If you want to announce something else, you need to ask me to configure my filter accordingly. There have been efforts to secure BGP. It's not that it's the Wild West out there, but still, due to the inherent issues that we discussed earlier, BGP hijacks occur, and the outcome of a hijack is, as Mike said, you can either eavesdrop traffic. This is the more malicious scenario, where the hijacker routes the traffic through his network towards the destination. Therefore, he's able to infiltrate the traffic and either steal bitcoins, which is a very common use case, or do any kind of malicious activity by eavesdropping. And the other bad outcomes are outages. So hijacks can cause complete outages of networks. And another case is degradation of traffic. Like if your path goes through networks that have not enough capacity to support your demand, your customers will suffer from traffic degradation, essentially.
And we see that a couple of times, essentially, and that's less a hijacker gets more a route leak, which amounts to the same thing instead of our traffic going through crossing different boundaries. And this situation where, for whatever reason, a configuration mistake, typically, where we've seen this route advertised through an ISP that doesn't have the capacity to carry this traffic. And all of a sudden, let's say I've got sort of 50% of the internet being traversed through a very small regional ISP, which is then going to result in drops and the traffic not actually getting to its destination.
So let's talk about a specific incident that occurred on May the 19th, 2023. Can you explain what happened there exactly, Lefteris?
First of all, I need to say that I am one of the founders of Code BGP. I got acquired by Cisco in August of 2023, and since then I work for Cisco ThousandEyes. Code BGP was a BGP monitoring company, and we had our own software platform that was monitoring BGP globally. And I was monitoring the root DNS prefixes. So first of all, I need to explain what the root DNS prefixes are, what the root DNS system is, and why I was monitoring it. The root DNS servers are the authoritative name servers for the DNS root zone. Essentially, they are the core, like one of the most critical infrastructure on the internet, since the DNS system, which is the domain name system, essentially the phone book of the internet, is relied on them. And we have 13 such DNS operators. Each one of the operators have hundreds of servers all over the world announcing the DNS prefixes, the root DNS prefixes. So essentially, this service is anycasted, is being announced, like for each prefix is being announced all over the world by hundreds of locations, the same prefix by the same AES. And this is how DNS works. So why did I want to monitor these prefixes? There are multiple reasons. One reason is that, as I said, it's critical internet infrastructure, therefore worth protecting. And second reason, which is more subtle, is that due to the anycast nature of DNS advertisement via BGP, any hijack, any exact prefix hijack on these prefixes would be hardly noticed on the data plane. Due to the fact that it's been announced everywhere, it will have the hijack. I was expecting the hijack to have a local impact, but it would not be even picked up by BGP monitoring infrastructures. So I wanted to see what I would find when I started monitoring DNS. And since the January of 2023, when I started doing that, I have detected many such incidents, hijacks of the root DNS prefixes. Actually, I'm writing a blog post about this that will be, it must be released by the time our listeners listen to this podcast. One of these incidents is May 19, 2023 incident, where one AES is starting to announce multiple root DNS prefixes at the same time. So it was announcing, it was AES 209.861, and it was announcing 3 IPv6 prefixes that they didn't belong to them. They were root DNS server prefixes, of course, A root, C root, and G root prefixes.
And what was the impact?
That's a great question. As I said, due to the anycast nature of BGP, of the DNS announcements, I was not able back then at Code BGP to detect the exact impact on the data plane because the Code BGP platform was a control plane platform completely, like it had no data plane capabilities. I would only be able to assume and infer that the impact on the data plane would be negligible due to the anycast nature of DNS that we mentioned earlier. But I had no means to assess the impact of the data plane. And that's one of the very cool things of working for ThousandEyes nowadays. The fact that now we have the ability, whenever an anomaly takes place, to also measure the impact of the data plane using ThousandEyes.
This is really important, Barry, because we have this issue where we're looking at these BGP hijacks and these attacks. We can see sort of a lot of movement or a lot of traffic taking place. But if they're sort of short-lived and then something's happened there, when you actually monitor, you may actually miss this bit in between if you look where the announcements come out. But then because we can now associate the data plane with that control plane, with that routing plane there, we can actually now see specifically the impact itself, because that's obviously what you're going to see. And this isn't just the echoes, the effects of it. When we talk about the impacts, we often talk about we're seeing a high loss rate or we're seeing something on that, but it's not specifically talking about the impact itself. We can see in this case where that traffic is passing through, which ISPs or which paths it's actually taken through. So therefore, then you can sort of see, right, this is the potential impact we're going to have as a result of this.
We need to mention two pieces of information for our listeners to have a full view of what we're talking about. First thing is that we have different types of hijacks. In this case, we are talking about an exact prefix hijack, meaning that the hijacker is announcing the exact same prefix as the one that belongs to their DNS servers. Whenever we have an exact prefix hijack, the entire internet is not affected. Only the local area of the hijacker is affected, since the AS hops near to the hijacker have a shortest path compared to the rest of the internet. We have even worse attacks than exact prefix hijacks, like sub-prefix hijacks. The hijacker announces a sub-prefix of the actual prefix. In the case of a sub-prefix hijack, due to the fact that the golden rule of routing, as we say, is that the most specific prefix always wins, when a hijacker announces a sub-prefix of a prefix, it steals the entire internet's traffic towards them. Therefore, they can cause outages, or they can infiltrate the entire traffic and send it back to the legitimate owner. Therefore, in the case of the exact prefix hijack, like the one we're talking on May 19, 2023, we are not certain what is the exact impact on the data plane because of the nature of the hijack, the fact that it's the exact prefix. There is a second thing that is worth mentioning here, and it's largely goes unnoticed by a lot of people, is that what we say in research is that data plane does not always equal the control plane. What does this mean? We might see announcements on BGP determining that the prefix is being announced by this AS, but the actual route that the traffic takes is not always what BGP says. And the reason is that we have static routes, we have default routes, we have layer 2 tunnels, we have, you name it, we have a lot of various things on the internet. It's a wild west out there. Therefore, BGP might not always tell you what the actual route of the traffic will be. You need to do active measurements in order to determine the actual path on the data plane.
And what made this incident particularly puzzling from a detection standpoint?
From a detection standpoint, there were multiple things. One is the fact that they were very short-lived announcements. They lasted 2 minutes, and afterwards they were withdrawn. And also that there were 3 root DNS prefixes being announced at the same second, like exact same timestamp. One of the innovations we did at Code BGP was we had the ability to detect events within 3 seconds of origination. At the time, it was never been done before. And that's why we were able to detect events with the exact second granularity. So one weird thing about this announcement was that it involved 3 DNS prefixes, and also the fact that they were all announced and withdrawn at the same time frame.
Were there any other clues that something was amiss?
At Code BGP, we had developed, and we now have integrated this technology to ThousandEyes. We had developed our own monitoring infrastructure. So we were using the RIS live WebSocket to collect BGP data from RIPE and CC, which is the routing registry for Europe, Middle East, and Asia. And we were also using our own monitoring infrastructure. What was interesting in this announcement that we picked up is that it was being seen by only one RIS peer, and it was not being seen by any other peer of RIS Live, which has more than 1,500 peers, out of which almost 700 of them are V6. Only one of them was picking up this announcement, and there was no Code BGP monitor able to pick up this announcement. So when I noticed that, because it was not an announcement that had very long AS path, for example, so that it would be artificially hidden and not being able to be picked up by BGP monitors, it was a normal announcement, normal AS path length. It should have been picked up, but it was not. And that led me, together with discussions I had with other network operators, to the understanding that this was a RIS peer malfunction, essentially. It was not an actual hijack that was taking place. It was that one RIS peer was, in reality, redistributing these prefixes to the global internet. It was being picked up by RIS, by the one peer, but then RPKI was stopping these announcements, or BGP filters were stopping these announcements, therefore they did not propagate to the rest of the internet to cause harm. It was just a misconfiguration, a redistribution of false prefixes to BGP that caused this alert.
So the defenses that are built into this system to protect against BGP hijacks worked here?
Yes, correct.
So what does this incident tell us about the challenges of BGP monitoring?
Essentially, there are major challenges in terms of being able to be certain that the data that you collect have essentially data integrity and data quality. There are two major public routing infrastructures that have been in service for the last 20 plus years. There is RIPE RIS that we mentioned earlier, and there is also RouteViews, another big network with thousands of peers based on Oregon in the US. Both these infrastructures have been providing a window on the evolution of the internet in the last 3 decades for all researchers, and we are all, both researchers and network operators, very appreciative of their work, and they still do this type of work. They provide this data for free to all people. But due to the fact, this is my personal opinion, I have discussed this with other people as well, up until recently, both these infrastructures have had what we call an open peering policy. Anybody who was able to peer with them and provide data, even if the network was not a professional network, even if it was a hobby of an individual. And when you have such cases where monitors provide the wrong data, there is a chance that this hobby network, the person who owns it, does various tests in order to learn BGP. So you might see data that are not exactly what you are expecting. I'm trying to be as polite as possible because I really care about these networks and I value their contribution, but this is the reality.
So this incident raises questions about BGP data reliability. Another important factor to consider is BGP Zombies. Can you explain what they are and how they relate to monitoring challenges?
BGP Zombies, or stuck routes, or ghost routes, are routes that are persistent in the routing table despite the fact they are withdrawn. In the beginning, nobody knew that this would ever happen. Like, we were considering BGP protocol that works 24/7, and there would not be such anomalies. It was in the early 2000s when ghost routes were first detected. The challenge of detecting ghost routes or zombie routes is that we do not know the ground truth on BGP. We do not know who's announcing what, when. So if you see, let's say, for example, at Core BGP, we had in our ThousandEyes hundreds of monitors all over the world. If a specific prefix is visible only by a subset of these monitors, like 10, for example, or 5 of them, this is an indication that this might be a stuck route, but you cannot be sure because this also can be a routing policy of the network operator. So the network operators have the ability to restrict the visibility of a prefix and allow it to be visible in a certain geographic area, for example, for traffic engineering reasons. We cannot know if this is the case or if it's a zombie. And the way we detect zombies, there has been some research in the late 2010s, 2 research papers actually, that used RIPE-RIS's BGP beacons. These are prefixes that are being announced and withdrawn at specific intervals. They are announced every 2 hours and then withdrawn for 2 hours and then announced again and so on and so forth. So we know at each given timestamp, we know if this prefix is either announced or withdrawn. Having this ground truth knowledge, if we see at a given timestamp and announce a prefix being visible on the internet, although due to the beacon nature of this announcement, it should have been withdrawn, we know that this prefix is a zombie.
So what problems do BGP zombies cause?
They can cause suboptimal routing, which is a good case scenario, up to even outages if you have a routing loop, which is a phenomenon that have existed, like have taken place in the past and have taken out large networks. The hard thing about zombies is that they are very, very difficult to detect because you don't have the ground truth as we discussed. Therefore, you are not sure, is this an actual announcement or is it a zombie?
How do zombies relate to the 19th of May 2023 incident that we discussed previously?
The May 19 incident was not a zombie in reality. I have had an interest in zombies. Actually, I have had an interest in all things related to BGP. But in February of 23, I did a presentation in NANUG 87 in Atlanta, where I used the previous research that was using beacons, BGP beacons by RIPE, and I did the same exact experiment myself using the core BGP monitors. I did a presentation at NANUG called BGP Zombies, and I extended this research by announcing prefixes that belong to code BGP, announcing and withdrawing them at given timestamps, the same logic, but prefixes that belong to code BGP and were not beacons, to see if there was any difference in the zombie phenomenon between the beacons and the code BGP prefixes. And the reason I wanted to compare the two is that in the research papers, they were saying that the noisy prefixes, meaning the prefixes that are being announced and withdrawn constantly like the beacons, tend to have more zombies. What would happen if you make announcements of prefixes that previously were not present in the global routing table? Will you have less zombies? Will you be able to detect monitors, RIPE-RIS monitors, for example, or core BGP monitors that constantly have zombies compared to monitors that have not? This type of questions that I wanted to answer. And yes, I also verified that the prefixes that are not noisy, like the ones that belong to core BGP, have less zombies compared to the noisy ones, but they still have a large portion of the internet seeing zombie prefixes as well. So the zombie phenomenon is largely underestimated. That's what I presented back then, and there's more research needs to be done.
What causes a BGP zombie in the first place?
The root cause is essentially that a BGP update is being lost for whatever reason. And because it's been lost, it is not withdrawn. A withdrawal essentially is lost, BGP withdrawal. Therefore, the prefix is not withdrawn from the routing table of the router, and it appears as a zombie. The reason can be many things. Typically, there are software bugs on routers. This is the most common phenomenon. Also, routing policies that are inconsistent can cause such phenomena. Even a restart on a routing interface can cause such events. There is a plethora of reasons why this might happen, but the bottom line in any case is that the BGP update is lost.
Mike, you cover a lot of outages. How many do you see that are BGP related? How big a problem is this?
I mean, you got the point basically of is it actually coming down to this? The first thing you have to really understand is, well, one is a real outage. What's actually occurring here? So when you're looking specifically at the outages, then we're going to come down and correlate the signals across there. So the first thing we're actually looking for is, what is the impact? Then we're sort of coming down to see what is the cause, because we're looking for that commonality within there. It's a very long answer to say it does vary. And the first thing we've got to identify is this something sort of malicious going on? And we identify this through aspects as these routing changes taking places. And then as Lefteris was saying, looking at the sort of the length of the path. So have we got autonomous systems placed in there? What has changed? How has it changed? Is there something being injected into that path that's slightly different, that's now for then impacted our area there? Are we going to a black hole? And if we go into a black hole, we then see that implicated. We see a whole bunch of loss situations. We also have these situations there from a BGP perspective and sort of an internal BGP when we're looking at the information from within an autonomous system itself sort of come out. So as we saw within the Microsoft outage back in 2023, January 2023 there, where we saw these sort of routing updates, this change within there, and they failed to withdraw the routes there. So we saw actually this complete failure of getting into that environment itself. So it really comes down to trying to identify specifically what's caused it. Because we're looking at BGP as a fundamental foundational aspect, that routing protocol that allows us to get from A to B or gives me the directions of how I'm actually going to get across the network there. It has a prevalence to sort of be impacting these scenarios across there. But I can't specifically give you a sort of one every week or whatever it is. They are quite there and it's quite often impacted it because it is a foundation aspect. So it's really understanding, is it the cause or are we getting it from somewhere else?
One more thing that is worth mentioning about hijacks in particular and route leaks and BGP anomalies is that BGP works with the best path selection algorithm, as we see. So each network, each router knows only what their neighbors tell them. They do not have a full view of the network like OSPF, for example. It's not possible in such a huge network like the internet. Parenthesis, because it's quite interesting, despite the fact that the internet from the early days where we had 20,000 prefixes present in the global routing table to now having 1.1 million prefixes in the global routing table and constantly expanding, and billions of users using it from a few thousand back then, the number of average AS hops that exist on the internet is the same, is 4.5 length, AS path length, which is astonishing. Like, it speaks for the ability of BGP to scale at such numbers without having any issues.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Everything we're looking at is my immediate neighbor. I just know how to get to the next hop. So therefore, then I know how to get to the next hop. We're trusting those peer relationship, which sort of goes back across everything we've said in terms of this trust and then understanding these filtering and the RPKI and things like that.
What's the difference between a malfunction and a deliberate attempt to hijack a BGP route?
A malfunction, the issue that it will cause is a false alert on the operator that uses a BGP monitoring system, because it will not be a real event. It will be a malfunction on the monitoring system. Therefore, a false positive. I will open a parenthesis here to explain something about our approach as researchers at Code BGP. Back at Code BGP, we were saying that we leverage the knowledge of the network operator when it comes to creating alerts, because each network operator, for their own network, they know who are their prefixes, their ASs, their neighbors, and their policies. They know that. The rest of the internet does not know it, but they do. So by allowing them to create alerts based on this knowledge, whenever you see, for example, you can say, this AS belongs to me and I'm announcing these prefixes. I know this. If the monitoring system picks up an announcement of your own prefixes by another AS, then you are being alerted and you know that this is not a false positive. You are 100% certain this is not a false positive. And this is like a simple idea, essentially, but powerful, that we were using back at Code BGP even before as researchers at the Artemis paper that I mentioned from 2018. And also now at ThousandEyes, we allow users to encode alerts based on their knowledge. Therefore, when they get alerted, this is not a false positive. I close the parenthesis. So in case of malfunctions, you just get alerted. A hijack can have serious impacts, as we mentioned, like outages. So they're very different events, essentially.
What are the lessons here for network operators in regards to BGP zombies and reliability?
First of all, people need to be aware that zombies exist, because from discussions that I had with operators in various conferences, a lot of them do not know that zombies exist to begin with. People need to be aware that such phenomena exist so that they can think about this might be the case when they see such low visibility prefixes. So, like to have to second thought if this is actually a policy or if it's a zombie route. Therefore, they will be able to troubleshoot events whenever they have issues with better accuracy and speed, essentially.
I think another point there is this combining of sources as well, like so multiple data points. We often talk about it. We talk about the outages is looking at everything in context. So if I can triangulate or understand what's going on, and rather than looking at it from a single point, so if they were saying, if I'm looking at it from a monitor that doesn't essentially have access or visibility across the whole of the guy around the table, I'm not going to see it. So if I have not necessarily more, but just the pertinent data of specifically where I need to get that, and then combine it with the different signals across there, all of a sudden I can actually start to reduce those false positives. I can corroborate what I'm seeing in conjunction with the alerts and understand what's going on.
Finally, the ThousandEyes teams also did some recent research on methods for detecting BGP zombies. Can you tell us a bit more about that and where people can learn more if they're interested?
An intern that came to ThousandEyes named Iliana Xigu. She's a PhD student at Georgia Tech, joined the BGP team last summer, and her research work, together with Andonis Hariton, a researcher in the BGP team, and Fondas Dimitropoulos, who's a professor at the University of Crete and the co-founder of Code BGP, along with Vasilios Kontronis and myself. These three, they worked on a new approach on detecting zombies. And they wrote 3 blog posts about this topic that exists, the engineering blog of ThousandEyes, for everybody who might be interested. The novel approach they presented, and it's a great idea actually, is in order to detect zombies with accuracy, they created what we call clock beacons, essentially prefixes that within the prefix, the timestamp of the announcement is encoded, including the date and the time. And these announcements are announced and withdrawn every 15 minutes. And by knowing exactly when they are announced and withdrawn, if you see them being persistent in the routing table, you know that this is a zombie. Therefore, you can infer zombies, but also you can infer who's causing them. From the AES path along the way, which AES is the most usual suspect. But from this AES, you see a lot of zombies coming out, a zombie breakout, as we call it. This AES indicates that it has a router that is malfunctioning for whatever reason, software issue, a network issue, whatever it might be, that is causing zombies to break out.
And that's our show. Special thanks to Lefteris Manasakis for joining us this week. Please give us a follow and leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. We really appreciate it. And not only does this ensure you're in the know when a new episode's published, it also helps us to shape the show for you. You can follow us on LinkedIn or X @ThousandEyes, or send questions or feedback to internetreport@thousandeyes.com. Until next time, goodbye.